An example of the effectiveness of using data can be found in the example provided by the corporate training sector. During the Industrial Revolution, human labor began to be viewed as capital. However, employees were judged on an almost entirely qualitative basis. If an employee was performing on subpar level, they were told to improve their work or be faced with being fired. Little feedback was given, and often the concept of improvement was very vague. With the rise of modernism came the shift toward a purely quantitative analysis of employee performance. Employees were held to a numerical standard, and subpar performance was defined as anything below the standards. Employees were given behaviorist-driven strategies to improve their work and to meet the benchmarks. However, the system ignored standards that contributed to the employees that could not readily be quantified, such as leadership ability or even teachability. Within the past 2 decades, a new form of corporate training has emerged that involves the use of both qualitative and quantitative measures. When one or more employees' work falls below the standard, a more comprehensible intervention is used that admits employees' limitations and leverages their strengths. It's a comprehensible approach that is found in most successful and is quickly being adopted worldwide in the corporate sector. When it comes to students, teachers believe qualitatively, meaning to use students' strengths to maximize their potential, while the state thinks quantitatively and provides a basis for objective feedback. While both have their perspective and power and change, as the corporate training sector modeled so clearly, we cannot have one without the other if we expect growth in our classrooms.
Why should you use data to make decisions? Well, we use data in every part of our life. You look at the weather to see what clothes to wear. You determine with your health whether you need to go to the doctor. If you're losing weight, you measure how much you've lost, or you're trying to lose weight, you measure what's working, what's not. Not using data to make decisions is kind of like going for a walk through your neighborhood with your eyes closed. You know the general direction and you feel like you know where you're going, but if you get off the beaten path just a little bit, you may end up in traffic or in a ditch. Using data helps us make wise decisions and change and make sure we're not doing things that may be wasting our time or being harmful to the students. So it allows us to make corrections along the way.
How can we hold students accountable with data? I think that's a great question. I think there's many different ways to do that. One, of course, is through data walls and data notebooking, but I also think there's different activities that you can do with students to hold them accountable for their learning. So the first here is an example of a unit on energy, and you can see there's listed the essential questions, and then there would be 3 different tasks that you would be doing for these different learning targets, and the students actually rate their own mastery of the learning target, remembering that it would be changing over time. So after the first task, is it closer to this is new to me, or is it closer to mastery where I've got this? And they put X's on this chart to show their confidence level in mastery of the specific standards. So you can see here is one that's already built for you, and I got this off of DPI's website. Actually, Heather Mullins actually modified these and created these. Here is a blank form that you could use where you would add your own unit title. You put your essential questions in, and then you put the actual standards that you're wanting to address in there. So you're holding students accountable to, this is the learning target that we want you to learn. How are you improving over time from this is a new concept to mastery? So I think these 2 charts here do a great job of holding the students accountable to learning that standard. Down at the bottom, you can also see that they can list vocabulary that they need to master there. Also, I think that you can use self-assessment to hold students accountable. Here, this chart says, understanding my learning needs. And this can be used when they're doing an assessment or when they're just doing an assignment. And usually the teacher would fill in the item numbers over on the left, as well as what standard did that want to line up to. And as the student is taking that assignment or assessment, they are marking for each one. Are they confident on that, or are they unsure of that particular question. So you can see where the gray bar is right here. You would have it folded down, and you would fill this out before the assignment. Then after the assignment, they would go back and mark if they had got that specific one correct or wrong. And then if they got it wrong, was it a simple mistake? For example, if this was a math test, was it just a simple computation error? Or is it something that you really don't understand that standard and you need to further study it? So this is a great way for students to be held accountable for their own data and looking and seeing how confident was I and did I really end up getting those correct or incorrect, with directions at the bottom here. So these can also be found on DPI's assessment wiki, and I'll also provide the links to these. So thank you very much.
Hey everyone, so what kind of data can you access through Homebase Empower Schools? If you log into your account and you come to the screen with your classes, you'll notice on the left-hand side there is a tab for SchoolNet, which obviously will be used when we have those online benchmark assessments and those data analysis. There is also a tab titled Reports, which will allow you to print off class attendance audits in a class grid if you need to. From the main screen, when you see your classes, you'll notice on the far right-hand side here there is a little backpack. If you click on that, you'll say student information, and you'll notice on the left-hand side is a rundown of all the classes that you are associated with. If you choose one of those classes, you'll notice that the students will be listed up here at the top along with the class. And if you click on the student, you'll be able to see a quick rundown of their schedule. And on the top right-hand corner, you will see that there is a drop-down menu with a wide variety of options to choose from as far as attendance to schedule to teacher comments to test results, and the idea is that test results, standardized test results, will all be on here eventually one day. Inside your grade book, there is a reports tab at the top, and that will give you access to a wide variety of score sheets, printing off report cards, or excuse me, progress reports, attendance grids. You can customize them as far as what gets printed off, and if you want to save them to your desktop, there's also a student information tab. This will give you a list of the students enrolled, gives you access to their numbers, birthdays, phone numbers, if you need to. So just a quick little rundown here of what is accessible. There is a lot more that we could spend time on. Hopefully this has been helpful to you.
So I want to spend just a few seconds with you talking about why we use standards to monitor growth. Part of the formative assessment cycle asks students to think about where am I going, and that's the North Carolina Essential Standards and the Common Core State Standards, which we call the North Carolina Standard Course of Study. Our job as educators is to help students understand where am I now in terms of understanding those standards, and as a teacher, we have to help kids figure out how to close the gap. So the first step is that we need to recognize where students are, and we do that through aligning our curricular goals to instruction and assessments so that we can give students targets, learning targets or essential questions, so that it's easy for them to identify which standards they've mastered and which ones are giving them trouble. And sometimes even when students can't figure that out, it makes it a lot easier for us as teachers to figure that out. And that leads us to be able to look at their strengths and their areas for improvement and adjust instruction accordingly. Once we know which standards students are getting and which ones they are not, we know when to move on, when to slow down, when to go back and reteach, and more importantly, we can actually figure out how to differentiate through intentional grouping, differentiated assignments, or different learning opportunities so that we can meet the needs of our students. Since our state assessments are standards-based and we actually know how they are weighted and so which standards carry more weight on our state assessments, we can actually give our students a greater chance for success by aligning not only our benchmarks that we give quarterly or every so often, but also our informal and formative assessments with standards, and then use that data with our kids to help us plan instruction. Speaking of using the data with data walls, with data notebooking, allowing students to use the data to self-assess and to set individual and even class goals. We can use our standards-based assessments to support students and prepare them not only for success in this course, but by teaching them how to analyze their own data, we're teaching them skills for success in future courses. And I think Cindy's going to talk more about that in her segment.
Hey, my question is, how do teachers respond to positive data? Pretty easy answer to that one. Teachers love to see positive data. It makes a big difference when you've been working as a teacher as hard as you can, and then you get a class test, a district test, or a state test back, and it just gives you a rubber stamp and saying, hey, you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing. It's just throwing fuel in the fire. It just makes it a little bit better for the teacher to handle all the other things that's going on around them, is when you actually have proof in your hand and you can show it to administration and say, my kids are getting it. It's one of those things that you work hard as a teacher to get that positive data, whether it's a classroom test or a state test. Classroom test, I know the students are thinking that it's just something to punish, but it's just a way for the teachers to say, are my students getting what I've been going over? And when overall teachers are getting it, the students are getting it, it makes you feel good as a teacher. You can move forward and you get a little more excitement, a little more want to go into it. When you're beating your head and the data's coming back bad, you kind of wondering, what am I doing wrong? Or what are the students doing wrong? What can I do to make it better? But when that positive data comes back, it's just like ice cream on top of a hot apple pie. It doesn't get any better. Give you an example. In CTE, we require that each objective, the class average is 85 before they move on to the next one. What we've found out with Miss Johnson just the other day, as I was talking with her, in her Foods 2 class, they are working on getting their ServSafe certification. And they just got finished with the hardest unit on cross-contamination and the sicknesses that are born with cross-contamination and other good stuff like that. Her students had over an 85% class average. Most of them were at 100%. She was so excited when she got that data back, and she says, the hardest part, the rest of it's easy for the students. And she's looking towards the end of this first semester, the first 9 weeks, that her students will be able to at least have 90 to maybe 100% of her students will get their ServSafe certification. It's a great feeling to know that you worked as hard as you can, your students' data is coming back and showing that they're doing well, and then when you can start comparing what you're doing across the state and saying, my students are prepared for the future. That's what we're here for. And that positive data is, it doesn't pay the light bill, but it sure does make you feel a whole lot better to know that you're doing what you've been hired to do and helping those students to be the best young man or woman for their future. I hope that answers the question.
Hello. Jessica Luby has asked me to speak briefly to a topic, basically to answer a question. The question happens to be, what should teachers do when they approach negative data that they get back from their classroom situation? Teachers can approach this differently. I would like to approach it from the standpoint of how I would like to see teachers approach negative data. Primarily that would be to approach, first of all, trying to get to the root cause. What happened that caused the data to become negative? Was it that it was simply a bad question? Did the students not understand the question? Was it an area that the teacher hadn't gotten to cover or cover well yet? And I think if a teacher approaches it from that standpoint, then the next question comes with, or down to, what is the thing that I need to do in order to fix this? Because the students will be held accountable for that particular material. So I think at that point it's necessary for the teacher to drill down and then try to find where the root cause was. Once that's determined, then the question that becomes really difficult for the teacher is, how would I take this information and fix it? And a lot of times that would require differentiation. Going back, do you go just to those students that missed the question? Do you go to the whole class? And I think a lot of that has to do with where the data is bad. Is it whole class? Is it individual students? And then the even harder part is, and this is what really takes a lot of energy for teachers, how do I work this into correcting while at the same time trying to determine, do I still have enough time to accommodate the rest of the material that I have to get accomplished with my students before the end of the semester or before the end of the term? So it's very difficult to try and do. Now, a lot of times it's very easy. The easy thing to do is to say, you know what, I taught this, the students didn't get it, I'm just really sorry that they did not get it, but I've really got to keep going. It becomes a very fine line as to how well you can deal with this with your students and be able to say, I need to reteach some of this or I don't. So it's really a question that comes down to that teacher, the data itself, and how important that information is to the assessment. Hope this helps. Thanks.
Why are data walls important and an expectation for Newton Conover High School? Data walls and/or data notebooks are used to track the academic progress of students. It is important that teachers track the academic progress of their students to ensure students are meeting state and local expectations. Data walls and data notebooks help students visually track their academic progress and set academic goals for themselves. Instruction will be more effective if teachers know where students are performing and the growth that they still have to make.